Imagine a world not so different from our own, where people lived in bustling communities, built homes, raised families, and shared stories under the open sky. Now picture that entire world, every street, every building, every carefully crafted tool suddenly frozen solid, buried under a crushing weight of ice, and hidden away from human eyes for thousands upon thousands of years. This isn't a scene from a fantasy novel or a distant planet. This really happened right here on Earth during the last ice age, and what was once a catastrophe for our ancestors has become one of the greatest gifts to modern science, a perfectly preserved record of humanity's first experiments with urban life. These ancient blueprints, locked away in ice, are only now beginning to see the light of day, and they're turning everything we thought we knew about early civilization completely upside down. For generations, we've been taught that human society evolved slowly, from hunter-gatherers to farmers, from villages to cities, in a steady march of progress. But what if that story is incomplete? What if, long before the pyramids of Egypt or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, there were societies capable of breathtaking architectural achievements, complex social organization, and profound spiritual insight, societies that flourished and then were lost when the world turned cold? The discoveries emerging from beneath the melting ice are suggesting exactly that. They're not just showing us frozen artifacts, they're revealing entire chapters of human ingenuity that were erased by time, only to be safeguarded by the very forces that seemed to destroy them. In this video, we're setting out on a journey to those frozen frontiers, from the permafrost of Siberia to the submerged coastlines of ancient continents, to piece together the story of these lost cities. We'll explore how ancient builders engineered structures that defy explanation, how communities adapted to unimaginable climate shifts, and why these findings resonate so deeply today as our own world faces environmental uncertainty. This is more than archaeology. It's a rediscovery of human resilience, a testament to our ability to create, adapt, and endure against the odds. So settle in, open your mind, and join us as we dig into the ice to uncover the forgotten blueprints of our shared past and just maybe glimpse the foundations of our future. But to truly grasp the significance of these frozen cities, we must first journey back to the world as it was just as the great ice sheets began their final retreat. This was a pivotal moment, a hinge in human history. For millennia, our ancestors had lived as nomads, following herds of animals and the seasonal cycles of plants. Then something extraordinary began to happen. In regions blessed with abundance, the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, the lush river valleys, a new idea took root. What if, instead of constantly moving to find food, we could convince the food to stay with us? This simple, revolutionary thought sparked the birth of agriculture, and with it, the very first experiments in permanent settlement. People began to cultivate wild grains like wheat and barley, and to domesticate animals like goats and sheep. This reliable food source meant that for the first time, it was possible to stay in one place, to build not just temporary shelters but homes meant to last for generations. This shift from wandering to rootedness allowed for an explosion of cultural and technological innovation. Without the constant burden of migration, people had more time to specialize, to think, to create. We see this beautifully preserved at a place like Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey. This wasn't just a village, it was a sprawling, densely packed proto-city dating back over 9,000 years. Its residents lived in mud brick houses that were crammed so tightly together there were no streets. People moved across the settlement by walking over the rooftops and then descending into their homes through holes in the ceiling. Inside, these spaces were rich with life and art. The walls were adorned with vibrant murals depicting hunting scenes, wild animals, and abstract patterns. They crafted intricate figurines, buried their dead beneath the floors of their homes, and displayed the skulls of their ancestors, plastered and painted to recreate their faces, a powerful testament to a complex spiritual world and a deep connection to their past. Similarly, the ancient site of Jericho, nestled in the Jordan Valley, reveals an astonishing level of social organization and architectural ambition. Here, thousands of years ago, its inhabitants undertook a monumental building project, a massive stone wall surrounding their settlement, accompanied by a towering, carved stone tower that reached over 8 meters high. The sheer effort required for this construction implies a centralized authority, a leader or council capable of organizing labor on a grand scale. This was a community that felt the need to define itself, to protect what it had built, to mark its place in the world as something permanent and significant. These were hubs where ideas, goods, and technologies converged. Obsidian from distant volcanoes, seashells from faraway coasts, and exotic pigments all found their way to these early centers, evidence of trade networks that stretched across vast distances. This was a world buzzing with potential, a civilization standing on the precipice of what we would recognize as modern urban life. They had architecture, art, religion, trade, and social structure. They were, in every meaningful sense, laying the foundational blueprints for everything that was to come. And then the climate shifted again. The progress wasn't wiped out by invasion or war, but by a much larger, impersonal force. The cold returned, not with the slow creep of the initial ice age, but in a series of violent, abrupt oscillations. Scientists believe a sudden influx of freshwater from melting glaciers in North America may have disrupted ocean currents, plunging the northern hemisphere back into a deep freeze in a period known as the Younger Dryas. For these thriving, settled communities, this was a catastrophe. Crops would have failed in the unseasonable frosts, game animals migrated or died, and the comfortable world they had built for themselves quickly became uninhabitable. What followed was likely a desperate scramble for survival. Mass migrations, the abandonment of homes, and the heartbreaking collapse of a nascent way of life. But in a cruel, beautiful twist of fate, the very thing that drove them out also preserved their legacy. The advancing cold, the blowing snow, and the encroaching ice acted like a global deep freeze, sealing these abandoned cities under a protective layer. It was a pause button pressed on human civilization, encapsulating these first daring experiments in urban living in near-perfect detail, waiting silently underground for thousands of years until we were ready to rediscover them and finally appreciate the sophistication of our own ancestors' first attempts to build a world together. But this golden age of early settlement was not destined to last. The stability that allowed these communities to flourish was shattered by a dramatic and rapid change in the global climate. The last glacial maximum, which peaked around 26,000 years ago, was not a slow, creeping winter. It was a climatic convulsion, a geological event that reshaped the planet's surface and redefined the boundaries of life itself. Imagine average global temperatures plunging by as much as 10 degrees Celsius. Massive ice sheets miles thick expanded relentlessly across North America, covering what is now Canada and reaching deep into the northern United States. Across the Atlantic, a colossal ice cap smothered most of Britain and Scandinavia, while glaciers advanced from the Alps and carpeted much of Europe and Asia in a frozen blanket. This was a world transformed, almost unrecognizable from the one we know today. The most staggering consequence of all this water being locked up in ice was the dramatic drop in sea levels. Ocean surfaces fell by over 120 meters. That's equivalent to the height of a 40-story building. Vast stretches of continental shelf that are now deep underwater were suddenly dry land, creating land bridges that connected continents. You could have walked from Siberia to Alaska across the Bering Land Bridge, or from mainland Europe to Britain across the vast plain known as Doggerland. While these new territories opened up, the environmental shockwave closed down countless others. Lush, habitable valleys were overrun by glaciers. Fertile plains that once supported grasslands and forests became frozen tundra, a treeless landscape where only the hardiest grasses and shrubs could survive. River systems that communities depended on for water and transportation either froze solid or changed course entirely, their life-giving flows choked off by the advancing ice. For the pioneering societies nestled along those now vanished coastlines and riverbanks, this was an existential crisis that unfolded within a generation. This wasn't a change they could adapt to over centuries. It was a swift and brutal alteration of their entire world. Think of a bustling settlement on the fertile banks of a great river. First, the winters would have grown longer and more severe. The river would freeze over for months, cutting off a vital source of water and fish. Then, the summers would have become disappointingly short and cool, causing crops to fail and wild food sources to become scarce. The game animals they hunted, like deer and wild cattle, would have migrated south to warmer climates, leaving behind empty forests. The very ground beneath their feet would have become harder to cultivate, eventually freezing solid into permafrost. Faced with this onslaught, these early urbanites had heartbreakingly few choices. Some communities undoubtedly attempted to adapt in place, developing new technologies for survival. They might have built more insulated homes, experimented with cold-resistant food storage, or shifted their diet to whatever scarce resources remained. But for many, the only viable option was abandonment. They were forced to gather what they could carry and embark on desperate mass migrations, moving south or to lower altitudes in search of hospitable land. These journeys would have been fraught with danger, uncertainty, and immense hardship. In their haste, they left behind not just their homes but their world. Tools were left on workshop floors, perhaps with the intention of a quick return that never happened. Pots containing the remnants of a final meal were abandoned beside cold hearths. Ornaments, religious idols, and children's toys were left behind, too precious to carry on a perilous journey but too personal to casually discard. It is this very suddenness, this forced and rapid exodus, that created the incredible time capsules we are finding today. The advancing ice and encroaching permafrost did not slowly crush these settlements, they sealed them. Like a snapshot, the deep freeze preserved these moments of sudden departure with astonishing fidelity. It created an anaerobic environment devoid of oxygen that prevented the normal processes of decay from destroying organic materials like wood, leather, textiles, and even food. Structures remained standing, their walls and roofs intact. The scene was frozen in time, waiting. In this way, the same global catastrophe that brutally ended this early chapter of human urbanization also became its most faithful guardian, protecting the blueprints of these first cities for millennia, ensuring that their stories would not be lost forever but would one day be thawed and told anew. And yet, even as this great chill descended, not all was lost to the ice. In fact, one of the most profound discoveries from this era suggests that some communities didn't just abandon their world, they made a conscious, deliberate effort to protect it. This brings us to a windswept hilltop in southeastern Turkey, to a site that has single-handedly forced archaeologists to tear up the history books, Göbekli Tepe. Discovered not by trained scientists but by local farmers who kept stumbling over strangely shaped stones, this place was initially dismissed as nothing more than a medieval cemetery. But when German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt first visited in 1994, he immediately recognized that these protruding limestone slabs were something far, far older. What he and his team began to uncover was nothing short of revolutionary. A vast complex of stone circles built over 11,000 years ago, a staggering 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza. The scale of Göbekli Tepe is almost incomprehensible for its time. We are talking about massive T-shaped pillars of limestone, some weighing over 20 tons, quarried from nearby bedrock and transported up the hill without the use of wheels or domesticated animals. These pillars were arranged into great oval circles with two even larger monoliths positioned at the center of each ring, towering over the others. And every single one of them is a work of art. They are covered in exquisite, detailed carvings, not just abstract patterns, but a menagerie of the Ice Age world: foxes, cranes, scorpions, snarling predators, and herds of wild gazelle. This was clearly a place of immense ritual and spiritual significance, a temple complex built by and for a society we are only beginning to understand. What makes Göbekli Tepe so utterly disruptive to the traditional narrative of human history is its age. According to everything we thought we knew, this shouldn't exist. This was built by hunter-gatherers, people who supposedly lived hand-to-mouth, nomadic lives, too consumed with the daily struggle for survival to ever conceive of such a monumental, coordinated project. There is no evidence of agriculture here, no permanent housing for a large resident population. This suggests that somehow these nomadic groups were capable of coming together, of organizing labor, of feeding a workforce, and of executing a sophisticated architectural vision that would have required skilled stonemasons and planners. It turns our entire understanding of cultural evolution on its head, suggesting that the driving force behind settling down and building complex societies may not have been agriculture, but religion, a shared belief system powerful enough to bring people together from across the region to create something permanent and awe-inspiring. But the story of Göbekli Tepe doesn't end with its construction. As the climate began to shift violently during the Younger Dryas period, the people who used this sacred site faced a dilemma. Rather than let their magnificent temple be destroyed by the advancing cold and shifting sands, they made an astonishing decision. They deliberately buried it. Layer by layer, they brought basketloads of soil, stone, and debris from the surrounding area and filled in the entire complex, carefully entombing every pillar and carving under a giant artificial hill. This was not an act of disrespect or abandonment. It was an act of preservation, a time capsule created with intention. They were safeguarding their most sacred place, perhaps with a hope or a prayer that one day, future generations would uncover it and remember their world. This intentional burial, combined with the dry, stable environment, is why the structures were found in such breathtaking condition millennia later, the carvings on the pillars still as sharp and clear as the day they were cut. Göbekli Tepe stands as a silent, powerful rebuke to the idea of linear human progress. It is proof that our ancestors possessed a sophistication, a spiritual depth, and an engineering prowess we never gave them credit for. It shows us that they were not passive victims of climate change but active participants in their own history, capable of foresight and profound collective action. They saw an environmental catastrophe coming and chose to save the heart of their culture, freezing their greatest achievement in time so that it could one day speak to us across the millennia, delivering a message about resilience, faith, and the enduring human spirit. While the temples of Göbekli Tepe were being carefully interred by human hands, another form of preservation was happening far to the north, entirely by nature's own design. Siberia, a name that conjures images of an endless, frozen, and empty wilderness, is in fact one of the world's greatest and most unlikely libraries. Its permafrost, ground that has remained permanently frozen for thousands of years, has acted as a flawless custodian of the past. We've all seen the breathtaking headlines about woolly mammoth calves and cave lion cubs pulled from the ice, their fur and flesh still intact. But these frozen vaults guard a far more profound secret, irrefutable evidence that humans not only survived in these brutally harsh landscapes but thrived, building complex communities in the most demanding environments imaginable. Consider the Yonah rhinoceros horn site, located well north of the Arctic Circle. Dating back over 30,000 years, this site shatters the old notion that the Arctic was a barren, uninhabited wasteland until very recently. The people living here were master adapters. They developed tailored clothing from animal skins, engineered sophisticated shelters that trapped body heat and blocked the wind, and perfected hunting strategies to take down massive prey like mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses. Their tools, carved from the ivory and bone of their quarry, show an elegant efficiency and a deep understanding of their materials. This wasn't a people merely clinging to survival. They were experts in their environment, leveraging its resources with remarkable skill. But the true revolution in our understanding is emerging from the traces of more settled life. Along the ancient, now frozen riverbanks, archaeologists are finding the outlines of something that looks far more like a village than a temporary camp. At sites like Berilek in Yakutia, they've uncovered the remains of dwellings built from a framework of mammoth bones, enormous skulls, tusks, and leg bones over which were likely stretched layers of hides to create a sturdy, insulated dome. Inside these structures, the floor of time is littered with the intimate debris of daily life: stone blades, delicate bone needles used for sewing waterproof clothing, and even the remnants of hearths. The quantity of mammoth bones found at some sites is staggering, representing hundreds of individual animals, which points to highly organized, communal hunting efforts and sophisticated food storage techniques in the natural freezer of the permafrost. Perhaps most tellingly, these sites yield objects that serve no practical purpose for mere survival. They include meticulously carved figurines, personal adornments like beads and pendants, and evidence of ritualistic practices. This is the signature of a people with a rich spiritual and artistic inner life, a community that had moved beyond the bare essentials to create culture and meaning. The permafrost's magic lies in its ability to preserve what archaeology usually loses forever: the organic world. In most places, wood rots, leather disintegrates, and food remains vanished. But here, in the Siberian deep freeze, these materials are kept in a state of suspended animation. A wooden spear thrower retains its precise carving. A strip of leather cordage remains twisted and strong. Even the genetic material of plants and animals is preserved, allowing scientists to reconstruct the entire ecosystem these people lived within. This paints a picture of human resilience that is far more colorful and widespread than we ever dreamed. The idea of the first city has always been tied to the warmer, fertile climes of the Middle East. But the Siberian discoveries insist we broaden our horizons. They suggest that human ingenuity ignited not in one single cradle, but in multiple cradles simultaneously, each adapted to its own unique environmental challenges. The blueprints for community living were being drawn in the frozen earth of the Arctic just as they were in the warm mud of the Fertile Crescent. These were not isolated bands of primitive hunters. They were pioneering societies, laying the groundwork for the human story in the most unlikely of places, their entire world faithfully preserved for us to find in the eternal ice. Just as the ice sheets were a preserver of the past, the world's rising oceans became another kind of museum, one not of freezing, but of flooding. The end of the Ice Age was not a gentle thaw, it was a great unleashing. For thousands of years, an inconceivable volume of water had been imprisoned in continental ice sheets. As global temperatures climbed, these glaciers began to retreat, pouring their meltwater back into the world's oceans in a relentless, rising tide. Coastlines we recognize today were utterly transformed, swallowed by the sea as it climbed over 120 meters. This was not a slow process in human terms. It would have been a terrifying, generation-spanning reality for the people living on those shores. They would have watched their familiar world slowly vanish, the sea claiming forests, valleys, and their very homes in an inexorable advance. But in doing so, the water performed a miraculous act of conservation, submerging these landscapes in a deep, slumbering silence that protected them for millennia. Perhaps the most evocative of these lost worlds is Doggerland. Today, we know the area as the North Sea, a turbulent, grey body of water between the United Kingdom and mainland Europe. But 12,000 years ago, it was a vast, low-lying plain, richer and more fertile than most places on Earth. It was a land of gentle hills, meandering rivers, dense forests, and marshlands teeming with life. Herds of mammoth, reindeer, and aurochs grazed its meadows, hunted by humans who established camps and settlements along its abundant rivers. These people lived in a connected world. You could have walked from what is now Amsterdam to London without getting your feet wet. Then the water began to rise. It was a gradual inundation, but punctuated by catastrophic events. Scientists believe a massive submarine landslide off the coast of Norway, known as the Storegga Slide, triggered a devastating tsunami that would have swept across Doggerland, delivering a final, deadly blow to any remaining communities. The sea finally closed over the last of the hills, and a complete continent vanished beneath the waves. For centuries, its existence was just a legend, hinted at by fishermen who occasionally dragged up strange artifacts in their nets: antler tools, ancient bones, and perfectly preserved peat blocks containing the roots of long-drowned forests. Now, through advanced seismic surveying and sediment core sampling, we are mapping this lost world in astonishing detail. We can trace its ancient river valleys, now channels on the seafloor, and identify its sunken lakes and coastlines. Each trawler's net that brings up a worked flint or a mammoth tooth is another piece of evidence, confirming that a rich, human-inhabited landscape lies beneath the shifting sands, waiting for its story to be fully told. This phenomenon of drowned worlds is not unique to Europe. All across the globe, the rising seas consumed the continental shelves where humanity first flourished. Off the western coast of India, in the Gulf of Combat, marine archaeologists have identified what appears to be a vast, submerged city. Known as the Gulf of Combat Cultural Complex, sonar images reveal startlingly regular structures, including what look like foundations, staircases, and extensive drainage systems. Artifacts recovered from the site, including pottery shards and stone tools, have been controversially dated to be as old as 9,500 years. If these findings are validated, they point to a sophisticated, organized society existing at a time when conventional history tells us only simple village life should have prevailed. Further east, near the Japanese island of Yonaguni, divers explore a site that continues to spark intense debate. The Yonaguni Monument is a massive, underwater rock formation featuring what appear to be immense, terraced steps, sharp right angles, and perfectly straight, clean-edged channels that look anything but natural. While some geologists argue it could be an unusual sandstone formation shaped by strong currents, others point to features that seem unmistakably man-made, such as what looks like a carved human face and a stone circle. Whether entirely natural, partially modified, or wholly constructed, the monument stands as a haunting sentinel to a time when that area was dry land, a place that would have been of significant interest to anyone living there for whatever purpose. What makes these underwater sites so compelling and so maddeningly difficult to study is their preservation. The same sediments that buried them have protected them from the eroding forces of wind and weather, and from the constant disturbance of human activity that has destroyed so many terrestrial archaeological sites. Structures that align with solstices or equinoxes remain perfectly in place, offering potential insights into ancient astronomical knowledge. Sophisticated water channels and foundations speak to a level of urban planning we are only beginning to appreciate. The rising waters did not destroy these cities. They placed them in a unique state of suspended animation, creating perfect time capsules on the seafloor. They are humanity's lost archives, holding secrets not written on parchment or stone, but etched into the very layout of streets, the design of buildings, and the organization of space, the silent, sunken blueprints of a world we thought was gone forever. It's a strange and powerful paradox that the very force which once erased these ancient landscapes from human memory has become their greatest guardian. We often think of glaciers as monolithic agents of destruction, slow, grinding rivers of ice that carve out valleys and pulverize rock into fine powder. And while that is certainly one part of their story, they possess another, more gentle identity, that of history's most meticulous archivist. Unlike a sudden volcanic eruption that entombs a city in a single, catastrophic event, a glacier's preservation is a patient, centuries-long process. It doesn't smash and bury, it envelops and protects. As these immense sheets of ice advanced, they didn't just crush the forests and settlements in their path. They gently, inexorably covered them with an accumulating blanket of snow that compressed into ice, and then layers of rocky debris scraped from elsewhere. This process created something extraordinary, a perfectly sealed, frozen tomb. The key to this miraculous preservation lies in the unique environment this ice blanket creates. By encasing an object or a structure, the glacier effectively locks it in a world without oxygen. This anaerobic environment is a death sentence for the bacteria and fungi that normally cause organic materials to decay. Think about what normally happens to a piece of wood, a leather shoe, or a woven basket left out in the elements. It would be consumed by rot, broken down by weather, and returned to the soil within a few years, perhaps a few decades. But under the ice, these processes simply stop. Time stands still. A piece of fruit can retain its shape and skin. A wooden tool can keep the sharp edge from its last use, and a textile can preserve the intricate pattern woven by its maker thousands of years ago. The most famous example of this is, of course, Ötzi the Iceman, discovered in the Alps in 1991. His body, his clothing, his tools, and even the contents of his stomach were so impeccably preserved that scientists could determine his final meals, identify the types of wood used for his arrows, and diagnose the health conditions he suffered from in life. But this principle applies just as powerfully to the ruins of entire communities. While Ötzi is a single individual, glaciers have the capacity to preserve a moment in time for an entire society. Imagine a wooden longhouse, its roof beams still supporting a thatch covering, abandoned in a hurry as a community fled an advancing winter. As the glacier moves over it, the structure isn't flattened, it is cocooned. The pressure is distributed, the oxygen is excluded, and the building is held in a state of perfect suspension. Earthen walls retain their plaster, post holes hold the remnants of their wooden stakes, and the artifacts of daily life are left exactly where they were dropped. This gives archaeologists an unparalleled window into the past, not through the interpretation of scattered stone tools, but by observing a complete, frozen snapshot of prehistoric life. Furthermore, glaciers have acted as the ultimate security system, protecting these precious sites from the two greatest threats to archaeology: looting and modern development. For millennia, these time capsules were inaccessible, hidden under tons of ice, safe from treasure hunters who would have plundered them for valuable metals or artifacts, destroying their context and meaning in the process. They were also shielded from the plows of agriculture, the foundations of cities, and the networks of roads that have undoubtedly obliterated countless other archaeological sites across the globe. The ice was a neutral, impenetrable curator, holding these collections in trust until humanity developed the technology and the curiosity to find them without destroying them. This brings us to the double-edged sword of our current era. The same climate change that is reshaping our world is causing glaciers and permafrost to retreat at an alarming rate. For archaeology, this is a moment of both unprecedented opportunity and profound crisis. For the first time, these frozen archives are becoming accessible. Meltwater reveals passes used by ancient traders, now littered with artifacts they dropped. Retreating ice patches in mountain ranges like the Rockies and the Andes are yielding perfectly preserved hunting weapons, clothing, and even the remains of animals hunted thousands of years ago. Each summer's melt reveals new treasures that were previously unimaginable. Yet this window is open only for a heartbreakingly short time. Once freed from its protective icy prison, an organic artifact has a very short lifespan. Exposed to oxygen, sunlight, and modern weather patterns, a 5,000-year-old wooden arrow shaft can warp, crack, and turn to dust within a single season. The very act of discovery signals the beginning of its rapid decay. This creates an immense ethical and practical challenge for archaeologists, who are now in a frantic race against time. They must locate these emerging sites, often in remote and dangerous terrain, and recover or document them within a narrow window before the elements claim them forever. The glacier, having guarded its secrets for so long, is now relinquishing them in a fragile, fleeting whisper, and it is our urgent responsibility to listen before that whisper is gone for good. But the true genius of these ancient builders is revealed not just in their grand monuments, but in the subtle, almost invisible details of their designs, the kind of practical wisdom that could only be earned through generations of lived experience. Let's take the seemingly simple concept of insulation. In the frigid highlands of Turkey or the Andes, a stone building is a death trap in winter, leaching precious body heat from its inhabitants. Yet, at sites preserved by permafrost, we find evidence of ingenious solutions. At Karahan Tepe, for instance, excavations suggest that builders packed the cavities between double walls with a mixture of straw, clay, and animal hair, creating a primitive but highly effective form of insulation that trapped air and maintained a stable indoor temperature. This wasn't just a hut, it was a climate-controlled environment engineered for year-round comfort, a concept we often think of as modern. Ventilation is another marvel. In large, enclosed communal spaces, the buildup of smoke from hearths and the stagnation of air could easily become a health hazard. The architectural solutions to this are breathtakingly clever. Some structures feature strategically placed air vents at floor level to draw in fresh, cool air, while a separate opening at the peak of the roof, often disguised within the structure's design, would allow hot smoke and stale air to escape. This creation of a natural convection current, a passive airflow system, required a sophisticated understanding of physics and thermodynamics. They were managing air quality and temperature without any mechanical assistance, using nothing but stone, geometry, and an intuitive grasp of how air moves and heat rises. Perhaps the most humbling engineering feat is their mastery of structural integrity and seismic resistance. In the Andes, where earthquakes are a constant threat, pre-Incan cultures like the Chachapoya developed techniques that still baffle engineers today. Their structures often lack mortar. Instead, they used a construction method known as ashlar masonry, where immense stones are cut with such impossible precision that they fit together like a three-dimensional puzzle. The blocks are slightly convex on their outer faces and concave on the inner, interlocking with their neighbors. During a tremor, these walls don't crack and collapse, they actually dance. The stones shift and settle against each other, absorbing and dissipating the seismic energy, and then, when the shaking stops, they simply settle back into place. This is a level of seismic engineering that many modern buildings still struggle to achieve, and it was perfected over 1,000 years ago, and we cannot overlook their hydrological genius. At many of these ancient sites, from the hills of Turkey to the mountains of Peru, we find extensive and complex water management systems that put many modern utilities to shame. At Karahan-Tepe, archaeologists have uncovered a network of carved stone channels and drainage ducts integrated directly into the bedrock and the architecture. These weren't just simple gutters. They were a carefully planned sewerage and freshwater system designed to efficiently channel rainwater for collection and storage, while also managing waste and preventing erosion and flooding around the foundations of the buildings. This shows a profound foresight and an understanding of public health and civil engineering on a community-wide scale. What these frozen blueprints ultimately teach us is that the narrative of human progress as a straight, upward line is a comforting illusion. The reality is far more complex and fascinating. It appears that waves of knowledge have risen, peaked, and then receded, often due to climatic catastrophes or societal collapse, leaving behind only fragments. The architectural principles we see in these ice-preserved cities, passive cooling, seismic resilience, sustainable water management, are not primitive precursors to our own technology. In many ways, they are elegant, low-impact solutions that we are only now, in our era of climate crisis, beginning to rediscover and appreciate as paradigms of sustainable design. These ancient builders weren't just stacking stones. They were encoding a deep, holistic understanding of their environment into their very homes, creating a legacy of resilience frozen in time, waiting for us to finally learn its lessons. The parallels between the climate catastrophe that ended the last ice age and the one we face today are not just striking, they are deeply instructional. We often look to the future for solutions to global warming, but some of the most powerful lessons are waiting for us in the deep freeze of the past. The societies we've been discussing didn't have industrial emissions causing their problems, but they were nonetheless confronted with a rapidly transforming world that threatened their very existence. Their experiences provide a profound, millennia-old case study in human vulnerability, but also in our incredible capacity for resilience and reinvention. Consider the primary challenge, resource scarcity. For an ancient settlement, a sudden, prolonged cold snap didn't just mean a few uncomfortable winters. It meant the complete breakdown of a food system. The wild grains they foraged might fail to propagate. The herds of animals they relied on for meat and hides would migrate south, following the retreating greenery, or die out entirely. This is a scenario with a direct modern corollary. Today, we see shifting climate zones disrupting agricultural heartlands, with droughts withering crops in one region and unprecedented floods washing away topsoil in another. The ancient response was not a single solution, but a portfolio of adaptations. They diversified. We see evidence of them experimenting with new, hardier plant species that could survive the colder, drier conditions. They developed new hunting technologies like more sophisticated projectile points and trapping systems to extract more nutrition from a scarcer landscape. This ancient lesson in diversification is one our modern monoculture farming systems would be wise to heed, investing in a wider variety of climate-resilient crops to ensure food security. Then there is the heart-wrenching reality of forced migration. The abandonment of places like the settlements of Doggerland or the villages surrounding the shrinking glaciers was not a choice made lightly. It was a desperate, last-resort decision to leave behind everything familiar: the homes they built, the sacred sites they worshipped at, the graves of their ancestors, in search of a place that could still sustain life. We see this same story unfolding on our news channels today, with climate refugees fleeing submerged coastal villages, desertified farmlands, and regions ravaged by increasingly violent and frequent storms. The ancient migrations were slow, generational treks across continents. Our modern world, with its borders and nations, presents different but no less severe challenges for those displaced by a changing climate. The ancient blueprint here is one of mobility and the painful but necessary acceptance that some places may simply become uninhabitable, requiring planned, managed relocation strategies. But perhaps the most inspiring lesson from the past is not about what was lost, but what was created in response to the crisis. This was not a story of passive surrender. It was an era of breathtaking innovation. Faced with colder temperatures, they didn't just huddle in their old, drafty homes. They reinvented shelter itself. We see the emergence of semi-subterranean houses, dug partly into the earth to use the ground's natural insulation. They perfected the use of insulating materials, lining walls with animal furs and packing roofs with sod and turf. This is the origin of passive solar design, orienting entrances to capture the low winter sun's warmth while blocking the prevailing cold winds. Their architectural ingenuity created microclimates of survival. Today, we are relearning these very same principles under the banner of sustainable architecture and green building, using high-tech materials to achieve the same goals of energy efficiency that our ancestors mastered with stone, earth, and bone. Their societal structures also demonstrated remarkable resilience. The construction of a complex like Göbekli Tepe, which required the coordinated labor of hundreds of people from across a region, suggests the emergence of strong, cooperative social networks. In a time of crisis, this ability to band together, to share resources and knowledge would have been paramount. It suggests that social cohesion and a shared sense of purpose were their most vital tools for survival. This stands in stark contrast to the isolation and polarization that can often characterize modern responses to large-scale problems. The frozen past whispers to us that our greatest asset in facing climate change is not a miraculous technology, but our ability to collaborate, to build community, and to work toward a common good. Ultimately, these frozen cities are more than archaeological treasures. They are a mirror. They show us a reflection of ourselves, a species capable of both profound fragility and astonishing adaptability. They prove that climate change has been a decisive force in human history before, capable of ending entire ways of life. But they also stand as permanent monuments to the fact that we are a creative and resilient species. We have faced existential threats and found a way through by innovating, adapting, and supporting one another. The challenge before us is not to invent resilience from scratch, but to rediscover it within ourselves, using the wisdom of our deepest past to navigate the uncertainties of our future. The ice preserved their story not just for us to find, but for us to understand and to act upon. So how do we find these frozen fragments of the past when they're hidden under miles of ice or deep below the ocean's surface? The answer lies in an archaeological revolution, a high-tech treasure hunt that's swapping shovels and brushes for satellites and lasers. The old image of an archaeologist painstakingly digging in a dusty trench is being completely rewritten. Today's researchers are just as likely to be found piloting drones over vast ice fields or analyzing complex data on a computer screen, using tools that allow them to see through solid ground and deep into the frozen earth without ever breaking the surface. One of the most powerful tools in this new arsenal is LIDAR, which stands for Light Detection and Ranging. Imagine flying a specialized scanner over a dense, overgrown forest or a vast, featureless ice sheet. The LIDAR device fires millions of rapid laser pulses toward the ground. While most light would bounce off the top layer of vegetation or snow, a fraction of those pulses penetrate tiny gaps, hitting the actual ground below and bouncing back to the sensor. By measuring the time it takes for each pulse to return, a computer can strip away the modern clutter, every tree, every bush, every layer of snow, to create an incredibly precise, three-dimensional map of the bare earth beneath. This is how researchers in Greenland have recently uncovered what appear to be vast networks of Viking farms known as Ita, hidden for centuries under vegetation and permafrost. These aren't just isolated homesteads. The LIDAR maps reveal a complex tapestry of field boundaries, pathways, and structures, suggesting a much larger and more established Norse presence than we ever knew, all discovered from the comfort of an airplane. For sites buried deep under solid ice, ground-penetrating radar or GPR takes over. This technology works like a sophisticated echolocator, sending radio waves into the ice and reading the signals that bounce back. Different materials, solid rock, compacted soil, a void like a hidden chamber, or a human-made structure reflect these waves in unique ways. By dragging a GPR unit across a glacier on skis or a sled, scientists can essentially create a sonogram of the ice, revealing the ghostly outlines of what lies frozen below. This method was crucial in the Alps for locating artifacts melting out of the ice, allowing teams to pinpoint areas where ancient hunters lost tools or weapons thousands of years ago, so they can recover them the moment they thaw out. It's a proactive form of rescue archaeology, using technology to race against the very melt that reveals these precious objects, but the search doesn't stop at the edges of the ice. Satellites orbiting high above the Earth provide a grand, macro view of our planet, capable of spotting subtle anomalies invisible from the ground. Using a technique called multispectral analysis, these satellites can detect minute differences in soil moisture, vegetation health, and even the chemical composition of the surface. A buried stone wall will affect how plants grow above it, often causing stunted growth that forms a straight line, a clear, geometric signature of something human-made that can be seen from space. This is how researchers have identified potential sites in the middle of the Saudi Arabian desert or the jungles of Central America. Even in the most remote and hostile environments, like the freezing deserts of Antarctica, satellite imagery has revealed strange, geometric anomalies under the ice that, while highly controversial, spark the imagination and drive further investigation. Perhaps the most mind-bending innovation comes from a field called environmental DNA, or eDNA. Scientists have discovered that soil and ice are not just dirt and water, they are vast genetic libraries. Every handful of sediment contains minuscule traces of genetic materials shed by every creature that ever walked, urinated, bled, or died in that spot, from massive mammoths to the tiniest bacteria. By drilling deep ice cores or taking soil samples from now submerged landforms like Doggerland, researchers can sequence this ancient DNA. This allows them to reconstruct entire ecosystems in stunning detail. They can tell you what types of grasses a mammoth ate for its last meal, what kinds of trees grew in a now frozen forest, and even that humans were present, indicated by the DNA of their gut microbes or the domesticated dogs that traveled with them. This isn't just finding artifacts, It's reconstructing a living, breathing world from the faintest biological whispers left behind. This fusion of technology is turning the speculative into the scientific. What was once the realm of legend and fringe theory is now being explored with hard data and peer-reviewed methods. Each sweep of a LIDAR sensor, each core sample of ancient ice, adds another crucial piece to the immense puzzle of our human story. They are revealing a narrative that is far more complex, interconnected, and surprising than we could have imagined just a few decades ago, proving that the most powerful tool for uncovering the past is no longer just a trowel, but the boundless innovation of the human mind. But what if the most precise records of these lost worlds weren't carved in stone or preserved in ice, but were instead passed down through generations in the form of stories? For centuries, scholars dismissed ancient myths and oral traditions as mere fantasy, colorful fictions invented to explain a mysterious world. Yet, a growing body of evidence suggests these narratives are far more than simple tales. They are a profound and accurate form of historical memory, echoing the very real trauma of the last ice age and its aftermath. Consider the Norse prophecy of Ragnarok, a cataclysmic event that begins with Fimbulwinter, a great winter that spans 3 years without a summer, where the sun is blackened and the world is locked in a brutal, endless cold. Brothers will fight and kill each other, and all bonds of kinship will shatter under the strain of survival. This isn't just a dramatic opening for a superhero movie. It reads like a stark, generations-old memory of a sudden climatic shift, a poetic recounting of the social collapse and desperate struggle for resources that would have accompanied a rapid return to glacial conditions. Travel across the world to the Indian subcontinent, and you find a different set of stories pointing to the same catastrophic events. Hindu texts like the Puranas speak of not one, but 3 great ages of humanity, each ending in a massive destruction. The first of these, the Satya Yuga, is described as a golden age of immense peace and advanced knowledge, a time when humans lived in harmony with divine beings. This idyllic era is said to have been brought to a violent end by a combination of water and ice. The descriptions are incredibly specific, telling of a world plunged into a deep freeze, followed by devastating floods as the ice melted. This sequence of events, a great cold locking away water in ice sheets, causing lower sea levels, followed by a rapid melt and catastrophic flooding, perfectly mirrors the scientific understanding of the end of the last glacial maximum. The texts even describe ancient, soaring cities, said to be built by the gods themselves, that were ultimately consumed by the rising waves, a narrative that finds a startling echo in the submerged ruins discovered off India's coast. This pattern of icy cataclysm is repeated in the oral histories of indigenous cultures across the Americas. The Navajo or Diné people have a powerful creation story that speaks of a series of worlds, each destroyed before the emergence of the next. One of these previous worlds is described as a place of bitter cold and pervasive darkness, a white world where the first people were driven to seek refuge by crawling through a hollow reed into the present sunlit world. Similarly, tribes of the Pacific Northwest, such as the Haida, recount a time of a great flood, but one that was preceded by a terrible advance of snow and ice that forced their ancestors to build great cedar canoes to flee southward to warmer lands. These aren't vague allegories, they are specific survival instructions encoded in narrative form, a collective memory of migration routes and the environmental triggers that made them necessary. For a long time, the scientific community largely ignored these myths, considering them unreliable and unscientific. But the discovery of physical sites that align with these stories has forced a dramatic reevaluation. The most compelling evidence comes from the precise geographical details often embedded within these tales. Aboriginal Australian stories, passed down for over 10,000 years, accurately describe coastlines and islands that were submerged by rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age. The native peoples of the Amazon have oral histories that detail the location of fertile, human-made soils exactly where archaeologists are now finding them. These aren't random guesses, they are remarkably accurate maps preserved not on parchment but in poetry and song. This integration of mythology and hard science is revolutionizing our understanding of human history. It allows us to move beyond the cold artifacts, the stones and bones, and begin to understand how our ancestors felt, how they processed the unimaginable trauma of their world freezing and then drowning. The story of a great winter becomes more than a legend. It becomes a window into the fear and uncertainty of a community watching their food sources vanish. The tale of a flooded city transforms into a collective grief for a lost homeland, a place that was once real and vibrant. By listening to these stories not as fiction, but as the longest-running oral history project on Earth, we gain a richer, more human, and profoundly nuanced understanding of the Ice Age. We are no longer just studying climate data and carbon dates. We are finally hearing the voices of those who lived through it, their warnings and their wisdom echoing across hundreds of generations, waiting for us to be ready to listen. But the story of the Ice Age is not just written in stone and ice. It's encoded within us in the very blueprint of our DNA. The brutal, millennia-long winter was one of the most powerful forces of natural selection our species has ever faced, acting like a great filter that reshaped the human body and our very biological destiny in profound and lasting ways. For the small bands of humans who chose to remain in or adapt to the glacial zones, survival wasn't just about building better shelters or crafting warmer clothes. It was about their bodies undergoing microscopic, generational changes that would ultimately determine who lived, who died, and what traits would be passed on to future generations, including us. One of the most visible legacies of this period is written on our skin, in the sun-starved landscapes of the far north, where the sky was gray for months on end. A major problem emerged: vitamin D deficiency. This crucial vitamin, which we primarily get from sunlight, is essential for bone development and a healthy immune system. In this new environment, dark skin, which was advantageous in sun-drenched Africa by protecting against UV radiation, became a liability as it blocks the weaker northern sun from synthesizing the necessary vitamin D. Over countless generations, a powerful selective pressure favored individuals with naturally lighter skin, allowing them to produce enough vitamin D to survive and thrive. This is why we see a gradient of skin pigmentation in human populations that correlates almost perfectly with latitude and historical sunlight exposure, a direct, living map of our ancestors' Ice Age journeys and adaptations. But the adaptations went far deeper than skin color. The human body had to find ways to simply endure the relentless, penetrating cold. Studies of modern populations with long histories in Arctic regions, like the Inuit of Siberia and Greenland, reveal fascinating genetic differences that helped their ancestors conserve heat. Some developed a more efficient metabolism geared towards generating heat from a diet rich in fat and protein from marine mammals, a metabolic setting that processes these fuels differently than other populations. There is also evidence of genetic tweaks related to the constriction of blood vessels in the extremities, reducing heat loss from the fingers and toes to protect the core body temperature, a biological trade-off that meant a higher risk of frostbite but a better chance of overall survival in the deep freeze. Perhaps the most revolutionary discovery in unraveling this genetic legacy, however, comes from the frozen remains themselves. By extracting ancient DNA from bones and teeth preserved in permafrost, scientists have unlocked a startling secret: our Ice Age ancestors were not alone. They shared the landscape with other now extinct hominins like the Neanderthals and the more mysterious Denisovans, and they didn't just coexist, they interbred. This wasn't a mere biological curiosity, it was a survival strategy. These other human species had been adapted to the Eurasian environments for hundreds of thousands of years longer than our own species. By mixing with them, Homo sapiens effectively acquired a ready-made toolkit of helpful genetic variants. From Neanderthals, we inherited genes linked to thicker skin and hair, better suited to the cold. From Denisovans, some populations, like modern Tibetans, inherited a gene variant that allows them to thrive at high altitudes with low oxygen, a trait that was likely advantageous in the high, cold plains of Ice Age Asia. This interbreeding provided a crucial shot of pre-tested genetic adaptation, giving our ancestors a vital edge in a challenging new world. Yet, this period also left a scar on our genetic diversity. The immense hardships of the glacial maximum caused dramatic population crashes, moments where humanity teetered on the brink. These events, known as genetic bottlenecks, occur when a population shrinks so drastically that only a small subset of its genetic variation is passed on to the descendants who eventually repopulate the world. It's like the entire human race went through a narrow doorway, and only a fraction of our original genetic richness made it through to the other side. This is why, despite our current vast numbers, humans have surprisingly low genetic diversity compared to many other species. We are all descendants of a relatively small group of incredibly resilient survivors who endured the worst the Ice Age could throw at them. This deep genetic history is not just a story about the past, it actively influences our present and our future. The same genetic variants that helped our ancestors store fat efficiently to survive famine can predispose us to obesity and diabetes in our modern world of caloric abundance. Our inherited immune responses, shaped by ancient pathogens, affect our susceptibility to modern diseases like autoimmune disorders and allergies. Understanding this frozen legacy allows medical researchers to see our health not just in a contemporary vacuum, but across a vast evolutionary timeline, helping us develop better, more personalized treatments and understand why certain conditions affect some populations more than others. Our bodies are, in a very real sense, living archives of the Ice Age, carrying both the ingenious adaptations and the hidden vulnerabilities of those who walked the frozen Earth. These frozen artifacts are so much more than museum curiosities. They are intimate, tangible connections to the minds and hands of people who lived in a world we can barely imagine. Each object, preserved with impossible clarity, tells a silent story of a moment frozen in time. A bone needle, its eye still perfectly formed, speaks of long, dark winters spent sewing together hides to create clothing that was not just warm, but likely adorned and culturally significant. It tells us that survival wasn't just about brute force. It was about patience, skill, and the human need for identity and expression, even in the harshest of circumstances. A woven basket, its pattern still visible, wasn't just a container. It was a product of someone's knowledge of local plants, their strength and flexibility, and the hours of labor required to twist them into something both useful and beautiful. It represents the foresight to gather and store, a fundamental cognitive leap from living day to day to planning for the future. The remnants of meals are perhaps the most evocative time capsules of all. At sites like the Yukagir Mammoth site in Siberia, finding chunks of mammoth meat, still recognizably muscle tissue, alongside wild grains and seeds, does more than just outline a diet. It paints a scene. We can almost see the communal hearth, the shared labor of butchering such a colossal animal, the careful preparation of every part, the meat for immediate feasting and preservation, the bones and tusks for tools and art, the hide for clothing and shelter. This wasn't a desperate scavenge. It was a coordinated, skilled operation that provided for an entire group, demonstrating a deep understanding of their environment and its massive inhabitants. It shows a society that was not just surviving, but thriving, capable of taking down the largest land mammals of the era and utilizing every single part in a spectacular display of efficiency and respect for the resources they depended on. The level of craftsmanship evident in these everyday items completely shatters any outdated notion of caveman simplicity. The discovery of a complete leather shoe in the Alps, laces and all, dated to over 5,000 years ago, is a stunning example. This wasn't a crude wrapping of hide around a foot. It was tailored, fitted, and designed for durability and comfort in rough, snowy terrain. Similarly, the finely crafted bows found with the famous iceman, Ötzi, reveal a master's understanding of materials. The wood was carefully selected and seasoned, the grip shaped to the hand, and the string made from strong animal sinew. This was not a disposable tool. It was a meticulously engineered hunting weapon, a lifeline that represented hours of skilled work and a profound knowledge of physics, material science, and ballistics. These people weren't primitive. They were expert engineers and artisans, using the materials nature provided to create sophisticated technology. Perhaps one of the most telling aspects of these frozen finds is what they reveal about social structure and long-distance connections. An obsidian blade found hundreds of miles from the nearest volcanic source is not just a sharp tool, it's a GPS coordinate on an ancient map of trade and interaction. Obsidian is like the fingerprint of geology. Each source has a unique chemical signature, allowing archaeologists to trace a tool back to its exact origin. Finding it far from home proves that even in the Ice Age, people were not isolated bands. They were part of extensive networks, trading prized materials, ideas, and perhaps even genes across astonishing distances. The same goes for seashells from warm coasts discovered in cold, inland sites. These shells, often drilled to be worn as pendants or beads, were likely valued luxury items, signaling not just trade, but also the existence of social status. Someone who possessed a rare, beautiful object from a far-off sea might have held a special place in their community. Ultimately, these frozen fragments of daily life allow us to reconstruct the emotional and spiritual world of these ancient communities. A carefully carved animal figurine, perhaps a bear or a bird, might have been a child's toy, a storyteller's prop, or a sacred object used in ritual. The use of ochre, a red pigment found on tools and in graves, suggests a symbolic world where color held meaning, possibly related to life, death, or spiritual power. By piecing together these artifacts, we move beyond the skeleton of their society, what they ate and what they wore, and begin to glimpse its soul. We see their creativity, their social bonds, their economic networks, and their spiritual beliefs. These objects are the ultimate rebuttal to the silence of the past, offering a vibrant, noisy, and deeply human picture of communities that were, in every way that matters, just like us, loving, creating, striving, and building a world for themselves against unimaginable odds. This question of why people left their homes is one of the most haunting and human aspects of the entire Ice Age story. We're not just looking at empty ruins, we're looking at frozen moments of decision, scenes of departure that were sometimes orderly and calm, and at other times frantic and terrifying. The evidence preserved in the ice and soil gives us powerful, if silent, clues. At some sites, the story seems to be one of a planned and managed retreat. Archaeologists find buildings where the doors and entryways were carefully sealed shut with stones or earth, as if the inhabitants hoped to return one day or wanted to protect their sacred spaces from the elements. Valuable, portable items like fine tools, jewelry, and ritual objects are gone, suggesting people had time to gather their most prized possessions. The hearths are clean, and there's little debris left behind. This paints a picture of a community that saw the changes coming, perhaps over years or decades, and made the difficult but deliberate choice to move on together in an organized manner. But other sites tell a much more urgent and frightening story. Imagine a place where tools are found lying right on the floor of a workshop, as if dropped in mid-task. Half-finished projects sit beside raw materials. Pots, still containing the remnants of a meal, are left beside a cold hearth. In some truly poignant cases, personal ornaments, a carved bone pendant, a string of beads are found abandoned, the kind of items someone would almost certainly take if they had any warning at all. These are the scenes that suggest a sudden, catastrophic trigger. There was no time to pack, no time to plan. Something happened that forced an immediate evacuation, a flight for survival where the only thing that mattered was getting out alive. The difference between these two scenes, the orderly departure and the panicked flight, is the difference between a looming crisis and a sudden disaster. So what could have caused such a rapid, terrifying exodus? Climate data from ice cores points to some truly apocalyptic possibilities. We know that the end of the Ice Age was not a smooth, gentle warming trend. It was a roller coaster of violent climatic swings. One of the most dramatic theories points to a cosmic event. Some scientists propose that around 12,900 years ago, a comet or a cluster of comet fragments exploded in the atmosphere above North America. This airburst would have been like thousands of nuclear bombs detonating at once, unleashing a firestorm across the continent and throwing enormous quantities of dust and soot into the atmosphere. This would have effectively blotted out the sun for years, triggering an instantaneous impact winter. Temperatures would have plummeted globally, killing vegetation and causing widespread famine. For any society in its path, this wouldn't have been a slow decline. It would have been an overnight apocalypse, a clear reason to run for your life without looking back. Other immediate threats could have been just as devastating, if slightly more localized. A massive volcanic eruption, like the one that created the Locher Sea volcano in Germany around 13,000 years ago, could have smothered entire regions in a thick layer of ash, poisoning the land and the water. There's also the terrifying possibility of disease. As populations became more dense in these early settlements, they became more vulnerable to epidemics. A novel pathogen, perhaps brought through contact with other groups or even from animal populations, could have ripped through a community, leaving the few survivors to flee in a desperate attempt to escape the sickness. And we cannot discount the oldest of human tragedies: conflict, warfare, or the threat of it from a rival group struggling over dwindling resources could have forced a rapid abandonment. The evidence might be there in the form of defensive walls that were breached or weapon trauma on skeletal remains, telling a story of a community that was overrun. Understanding these abandonment stories does more than just satisfy our historical curiosity. It forces us to confront the profound fragility of human civilization, no matter how advanced it may seem. These were not primitive people. They were ingenious, adaptable, and organized. They built structures that awe us today and created complex social networks. And yet, they were brought to their knees by forces far beyond their control. Their story is a powerful reminder that our own modern, interconnected world is not immune to similar shocks. Their choices to leave methodically or to flee in panic echo the impossible decisions that climate refugees and those fleeing disaster are forced to make today. They teach us about resilience, but also about vulnerability, showing us that the thread of civilization, while strong, is also incredibly thin, and that the courage to leave everything behind is sometimes the only choice that ensures survival. So how do we move from these haunting scenes of abandonment to a clear, scientific understanding of what actually happened? How can we be sure that a sudden cold snap or a devastating drought was to blame for the empty homes and scattered tools? The answers to these questions don't just lie in the soil of these ancient sites. They are preserved in the ice itself, waiting miles thick on top of Greenland and Antarctica. Imagine a library where every book is a cylinder of ancient ice, and every page is a single year's snowfall compressed over millennia. This is the incredible reality of ice core drilling, a scientific technique that allows us to read the Earth's climate history with astonishing precision, right down to the composition of the air that our ancestors breathed. The process itself is a feat of modern engineering and endurance. Teams of scientists brave some of the most extreme environments on the planet to set up drilling rigs that can extract cores of ice over 2 miles long. As snow falls each year, it lays down a distinct layer, trapping within it tiny bubbles of the atmosphere, along with dust, volcanic ash, and chemical isotopes from around the globe. Over thousands of years, the weight of subsequent snowfalls compresses these layers into solid ice, creating a pristine, sequential record of the past. It's like a natural flight data recorder for the entire planet, continuously logging vital signs. By carefully extracting these cores and analyzing them in laboratories, researchers can count the layers back in time, much like counting the rings of a tree, but on a scale that spans hundreds of thousands of years. The real magic is in those tiny, trapped air bubbles. Each one is a sealed sample of the ancient atmosphere, a time capsule of the very air that swirled around Göbekli Tepe or filled the lungs of the mammoth hunters in Siberia. By piercing these bubbles with lasers and mass spectrometers, scientists can measure the precise concentrations of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane from any given year in the distant past. Furthermore, the ice itself holds a temperature record. The ratio of different oxygen isotopes in the water molecules acts as a proxy thermometer. Heavier isotopes tend to condense and fall as snow at different temperatures than lighter ones. By measuring this ratio layer by layer, scientists can chart the planet's temperature fluctuations with incredible accuracy, identifying exactly when the world warmed or cooled, and by exactly how much. This data has been utterly revolutionary for understanding the human story of the Ice Age. Take the Younger Dryas period, a climatic event that has come up again and again in our exploration. For a long time, evidence for this sudden, brutal cold snap, which lasted over 1,000 years, was found in geological oddities and puzzling archaeological layers. But it was the ice cores from Greenland that provided the irrefutable smoking gun. The data showed an unmistakable, terrifyingly rapid temperature drop of nearly 10 degrees Celsius in some regions, happening within a decade, a blink of an eye in geological terms. This wasn't a gradual shift that cultures could adapt to over generations. This was a climatic hammer blow. Seeing this data curve plunge downward on a graph instantly gives context to those panicked abandonments we discussed. It explains why a meal would be left half-eaten and why a community would flee their homes without looking back. They were literally running for their lives from a change in the weather they could feel but couldn't possibly understand. The value of this ice core record extends far beyond confirming single events. It provides the essential chronological backbone for global archaeology. When an archaeologist uncovers a site that was clearly abandoned during a period of drought, they can now cross-reference their findings with the ice core data from that same era. If the cores show a massive volcanic eruption in Iceland that spewed a distinct chemical signature across the globe, and that same signature is found in the layer of ash covering a lost city, we can suddenly date that city's demise with incredible precision. This turns isolated archaeological mysteries into interconnected pieces of a global puzzle, allowing us to weave a coherent narrative of how climate change simultaneously affected humanity across continents, forcing migrations, sparking innovations, and, in some tragic cases, wiping entire cultures off the map. Perhaps most powerfully, these frozen archives provide the ultimate baseline for measuring our current impact on the planet. The ice cores show us the natural rhythm of Earth's climate over hundreds of thousands of years, the gentle, predictable cycles of warming and cooling driven by subtle changes in the Earth's orbit. And then they show the moment we, as a species, began to fundamentally alter that rhythm. The graph of carbon dioxide and methane concentrations remains remarkably stable for 800,000 years. And then, in the layer representing the start of the Industrial Revolution, the line spikes upward at a rate and magnitude that is completely off the charts, completely unnatural. This is the undeniable evidence that places our modern climate change squarely in the context of deep time. It shows us that the changes we are driving today are not part of a natural cycle. They are an anomaly, a grand and dangerous experiment. The same ice that preserved the blueprints of our first cities now holds an urgent message for our current one, a warning from the past written in frozen air, telling us exactly how unprecedented our present situation truly is. What if the story we tell ourselves about human history is not just incomplete, but fundamentally wrong? The conventional timeline, a tidy progression from primitive hunter-gatherers to sophisticated farmers and city builders, is a framework that has provided comfort and order for over a century. But what if that framework is a cage, limiting our understanding of humanity's true potential and past? This is the provocative question at the heart of a theory that is gaining increasing attention, one that suggests a great civilization, or perhaps a network of them, flourished in the deep past, only to be utterly erased by the cataclysm of the last glacial maximum. Proponents of this idea, often associated with researchers like Graham Hancock, don't just see sites like Göbekli Tepe as anomalies. They see them as surviving fragments of a much larger, global puzzle, the scattered ruins of a world lost to ice and time. The evidence they point to is not found in a single discovery, but in a web of tantalizing connections that span the globe. It's in the mind-boggling precision of the stonework at sites like Puma Punku in Bolivia, where andesite blocks are cut with such geometric perfection and drilled with such exacting bore holes that they seem to defy the supposed simple toolkits of their era. It's in the ancient world's apparent obsession with astronomy. Structures from the Great Pyramid of Giza to the megalithic temples of Malta are aligned with stunning accuracy to celestial events like solstices and equinoxes, suggesting a shared, sophisticated understanding of the cosmos that predates accepted history by thousands of years. Perhaps most compelling are the mythological threads that weave through seemingly disconnected cultures. The story of a great flood that purges the world is not just a biblical narrative. It appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh from Mesopotamia, in the lore of the Maya, in the indigenous traditions of Australia, and in the ancient texts of India. Could these all be distant, distorted echoes of a real, shared traumatic event, the rapid melting of the ice sheets and the catastrophic rising seas that drowned continental coastlines and the civilizations that lived on them? For mainstream archaeology, however, this is a bridge too far. The scientific method demands evidence that is concrete, verifiable, and contextual. The established view maintains that the absence of what archaeologists call the package is definitive proof against such advanced prehistoric societies. Where is the evidence of their agriculture on a scale to support large cities? Where are their mines, their smelting facilities, their workshops, their garbage heaps, a civilization advanced enough to undertake global seafaring and monumental architecture would have left an indelible and unmistakable industrial footprint on the landscape, one that would be nearly impossible for the Ice Age to have completely scrubbed away. The skepticism is not born of closed-mindedness, but of a rigorous adherence to a standard of proof that, so far, the theory has not met. The precise masonry could be the result of highly skilled, patient craftsmanship rather than lost technology. The shared flood myths could be a universal human response to the very real, localized flooding that every culture experiences, rather than a memory of a single global event. Yet, it is this very tension between the established view and the controversial theory that makes the question so vital and so engaging. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that history is written by the survivors, and that a catastrophe on the scale of the last glacial maximum could have been a near-total reset button for humanity. It asks us to consider the possibility of cultural amnesia, that the survivors of such an event, scattered and reduced to a subsistence lifestyle, could have carried only the faintest, mythologized remnants of their former world into the new age, their advanced knowledge dissolving into legend and then into forgotten whispers over the millennia. The true value of this debate may not be in proving one side definitively right today, but in pushing the boundaries of inquiry. It challenges archaeologists to look harder, to dig deeper, and to consider more unconventional interpretations of the evidence coming out of the ground. It keeps the field dynamic, preventing it from becoming a stale recitation of accepted facts. The frozen blueprints we've been discussing, from the submerged ruins on the seafloor to the structures emerging from melting glaciers, are therefore more than just archaeological curiosities. They are the potential litmus test for this grand historical mystery. As more of these sites are revealed by our changing climate, they offer a unique opportunity to search for that elusive, smoking gun. Will we find a tool, an inscription, or a material that simply cannot be explained by the conventional timeline? Or will these sites, upon meticulous examination, ultimately fit into the complex, if slower, narrative of human progress that science has painstakingly built? The answer is waiting, frozen in time, and with each passing summer's melt, we move closer to it. This isn't about rewriting history out of a desire for mystery. It's about being open to the possibility that the story of humanity is far older, more complex, and more incredible than we have ever dared to imagine. Yet this very act of melting, while threatening to erase history, is also what's revealing it to us in the first place, creating a paradoxical race where discovery and decay are two sides of the same coin. As the planet warms, the ancient ice that has safeguarded these time capsules for millennia is receding at a breathtaking and alarming pace, pulling back a frozen curtain to show us glimpses of a world we never knew, only to threaten it with immediate destruction the moment it's exposed to the modern air. This isn't a slow, gentle unveiling. It's a frantic, desperate scramble. Imagine an entire library of ancient, priceless books suddenly being thrown open to the elements, where each page begins to crumble and fade the very second sunlight touches it. That is the precise dilemma facing archaeologists today. The very conditions that have preserved organic materials like leather, wood, textiles, and even human flesh for thousands of years, the constant cold, the lack of oxygen, the stable darkness, are instantly shattered upon exposure. A 5,000-year-old arrow shaft, perfectly intact when encased in ice, can warp, crack, and turn to dust within a single season. A piece of clothing, its stitching and dyes still vibrant, can be reduced to a fragile, discolored rag in a matter of weeks. This creates an agonizingly short window between a site's discovery and its complete disintegration, forcing scientists into a high-stakes race against the elements. This urgency has catalyzed a new era of international cooperation and technological innovation in archaeology, transforming it from a methodical, slow-paced science into a discipline of rapid response and digital preservation. Teams from around the globe are now converging on melting ice patches and retreating glaciers, working in brief summer field seasons to recover what they can. The traditional tools of the trade trowels and brushes are now complemented by cutting-edge technology. High-resolution 3D laser scanners are deployed to create perfect digital replicas of sites and artifacts before they are even touched, preserving every detail in a virtual world even if the original turns to dust. Photogrammetry, which uses hundreds of overlapping photographs to build a 3D model, allows for incredibly detailed digital reconstructions that can be studied by anyone, anywhere in the world. Drones buzz over vast, treacherous terrain, mapping areas that would take humans weeks to cover on foot, identifying new sites as they emerge from the ice. This isn't just about collecting objects, it's about capturing data with a speed and precision that was unimaginable just a decade ago, creating a digital arc for a vanishing past. And the treasures they are saving are rewriting chapters of history in real time. In the mountains of Norway, the retreat of an ice patch revealed a lost Viking mountain pass, a frozen highway used over 1,000 years ago. The site was littered with an incredible array of everyday items that the ice had perfectly preserved: horseshoes, sled fragments, a perfectly preserved wooden whisk, a knife with its wooden handle still intact, and even a box of candles. Most remarkably, they found a woolen tunic, a rare and intimate glimpse into the clothing of the era. These weren't the prized possessions of kings and queens hidden in a tomb. They were the lost items of common travelers, a snapshot of daily life and trade routes that no parchment or stone carving could ever provide. Each artifact is a sentence in a story we are only just beginning to read, a story that is emerging from the ice with ever-increasing frequency. This creates a profound and difficult duality for researchers, a constant tension between mourning and miracle. Every new discovery is cause for celebration, a window into a forgotten world. But each one is also a sobering reminder of the countless other sites and artifacts that are melting out unseen in remote corners of the world, decaying and vanishing before anyone can document them. For every Viking pass found and carefully excavated, there are undoubtedly a dozen more that are melting, their organic treasures rotting away, their stories lost forever. This immense loss underscores the critical need for increased funding, public awareness, and support for these archaeological missions. They are no longer purely academic exercises. They are emergency rescue operations. The melting ice holds the untold history of humanity's resilience and adaptability, a history that contains crucial lessons for our own era of climate change. To lose these fragile records now, just as we've found them, would be a tragedy of incalculable proportions, a final silence after a whisper that waited 12,000 years to be heard. Now consider the humble spiral, one of the most pervasive and enigmatic symbols to emerge from the Ice Age world. This intricate motif appears with startling consistency across continents and cultures that, according to traditional history, should have had no contact whatsoever. In Ireland, it's painstakingly carved into the great stones of the Neolithic tomb at Newgrange, a structure older than the pyramids. Across Europe, it appears on pottery and tomb walls. And then, thousands of miles away, the same spiral symbol shows up again, carved into the rocks of the American Southwest by ancient Pueblo peoples and appearing in the art of the Marajora culture in the Amazon. This isn't a simple shape that different groups might independently invent. The complexity and specific execution of these spirals, often double or triple-armed and integrated into larger symbolic narratives, suggests something far deeper than coincidence. It points towards a shared symbolic language, a way of representing cosmic cycles, life, death, and rebirth that was understood across unimaginable distances. How could such a specific idea travel from the banks of the Boyne River in Ireland to the cliffs of the Arizona desert, unless the people who held these beliefs were themselves moving across the world? This pattern of connection extends far beyond abstract art and into the very foundations of sacred architecture. The most compelling evidence lies in the megalithic tomb, a specific architectural blueprint that appears across the frozen and post-glacial world. Think of the classic structure, a narrow, stone-lined passage leading to a central burial chamber, often topped with an enormous earthen mound. This design is famously exhibited in the passage graves of Ireland's Brú na Bóinne complex. Now travel to the coast of Portugal and you'll find identical structures. Journey to the Loire Valley in France and they appear again. But the real shock comes when you look across the Atlantic. The so-called beehive tombs of the Maya, or certain early burial mounds constructed by indigenous cultures in North America, follow a strikingly similar architectural principle. The logistical challenge of building these structures, quarrying, moving, and erecting multi-ton stones, implies a sophisticated and shared knowledge of engineering and astronomy, as many are precisely aligned with solstices or equinoxes. This isn't just a similar idea, it's the same complex recipe for connecting the world of the living with the realm of the ancestors, built to the same specifications by cultures separated by oceans. Perhaps the most intimate and widespread connection of all is found in the universal practice of burial with red ochre. This crimson iron oxide pigment has been found sprinkled over human remains from the sun-baked plains of Australia to the frozen steppes of Siberia, from the depths of European caves to the ancient burial grounds of North America. The practice is so consistent that it offers a profoundly moving glimpse into the spiritual mind of Ice Age humanity. The color red, the color of blood and life, seems to have been a powerful symbol of rebirth, a hope for returning the vital essence to the deceased for their journey into the next world. Finding this same specific funerary practice in a grave in Wales dating back 25,000 years, and then again in a 9,000-year-old burial in Brazil, is not just an archaeological curiosity. It is a direct, emotional link between the minds of our ancestors, a shared response to the mystery of death that transcended every geographic and environmental boundary. It suggests a fundamental, common human spirituality that was carried out of Africa and across the globe, remaining intact even as groups became isolated for millennia. So how do we explain this incredible web of shared ideas? The old model of human development, which pictured isolated cultures evolving independently in their own little bubbles, is clearly inadequate. The evidence written in stone and ochre demands a new narrative, one of astonishing mobility and enduring connection. The world our Ice Age ancestors inhabited was vastly different from our own. Lower sea levels exposed vast continental shelves, creating land bridges like Beringia, which connected Asia to North America, and Sunderland, which joined the islands of Southeast Asia into a single landmass. But it was more than just these famous bridges. Entire coastlines that are now submerged would have offered rich resources and highways for migration. We must imagine groups of highly adaptable people moving along these now lost coasts, following herds, exploring new territories, and maintaining tenuous but real lines of contact with the groups they left behind. They were not static, they were dynamic, interconnected networks, and with them they carried their stories, their symbols, and their architectural blueprints. This revised picture doesn't just change our understanding of the past, it profoundly alters our sense of the present. The discovery of these deep cultural threads forces us to abandon outdated notions of pure, isolated ethnicities or cultures that developed in complete isolation. It reveals a much older, more deeply interconnected humanity. The symbols we think of as uniquely Celtic or Native American or Asian may, in fact, have roots in a common ancestral heritage that predates the very concept of these continents. Our ancestors were world travelers in an age of ice, bound together by a shared human experience and a common creative spirit that expressed itself in remarkably consistent ways. By tracing these threads, the spiral, the megalith, the red ochre, we are not just studying archaeology, we are reuniting a global family, piecing together a story of human connection that is far older, richer, and more beautiful than we ever imagined. This relentless winnowing by the elements did more than just change our physical form. It forged the very essence of our humanity in the crucible of scarcity and cold. The development of complex tools was a direct response to the need for efficiency in a world where every calorie of energy expended had to be justified by a sufficient return. The spear thrower, or atlatl, was a revolutionary leap in hunting technology. It wasn't merely a longer arm, it was a masterpiece of physics, a lever that effectively extended the hunter's own body, allowing a spear to be launched with devastating force and accuracy from a much safer distance. This increased the success rate of hunting massive, dangerous prey like mammoths and bison, turning a high-risk endeavor into a more reliable source of sustenance for the entire group. The payoff was immense, but it required a sophisticated cognitive understanding of leverage, trajectory, and material science to craft these devices from antler or wood and to use them with lethal skill. Alongside these weapons of the hunt came the tools of domestic survival, and none were more vital than the eyed needle, crafted from slivers of bone or ivory with a meticulously drilled hole at one end. This simple object represents a quantum leap in our ability to master our environment. Before its invention, clothing was likely draped or tied. The needle allowed for the creation of tailored, layered garments, parkas with hoods, trousers, boots, and mittens that were snugly sewn with sinew thread. This was the difference between shivering in a drafty hide and being encased in a weatherproof, insulated suit that trapped body heat with revolutionary efficiency. It enabled humans to colonize landscapes previously thought uninhabitable, pushing further north into the glacial heartlands of Europe and Asia. The very act of sewing, often a communal task undertaken by firelight during the long winter nights, required immense patience, fine motor skills, and forward planning. The careful preparation and treatment of hides, the storage of sinew, and the creation of a specialized toolkit. This wasn't just crafting clothing, it was engineering portable, personal microclimates. This drive for survival demanded more than just technological innovation. It necessitated a social revolution. The unforgiving Ice Age environment would have brutally punished selfishness and individualism. The solitary hunter, the hoarder, the uncooperative member, these were luxuries that no group could afford. The evolutionary pressure shifted powerfully toward cooperation, toward the strengthening of social bonds. Successful hunting of megafauna required coordinated group tactics, communication, and the equitable sharing of the massive caloric windfall from a single kill. Knowledge became the most valuable currency. The elder who remembered the migratory routes of the reindeer herds, the individual who knew which plants had medicinal properties even under the snow, the artisan who could best fashion a warm pair of boots. Groups that fostered trust, empathy, and a sense of collective responsibility were the ones that not only survived but thrived, passing these prosocial genes and behaviors onto future generations. This social and environmental pressure cooker appears to have been the catalyst for an explosion of cognitive and cultural development. The need to plan for seasons ahead, to store food, to anticipate animal movements, to coordinate complex hunts and long-distance migrations placed a premium on foresight and abstract thinking. Language would have evolved rapidly to become more complex, capable of conveying not just immediate dangers, but also past experiences and future plans, stories that carried vital survival information across generations. And from this wellspring of heightened cognition and deeper social connection flowed art. The breathtaking cave paintings of Lascaux and Chauvet were not mere doodles, they were profound expressions of a symbolic world, a way of understanding and perhaps gaining power over the animals they depended upon. The delicate carvings of voluptuous Venus figurines found from France to Siberia suggest shared beliefs about fertility and survival. This flowering of creativity under such dire conditions is one of history's greatest paradoxes, proving that the human spirit, when pressed to its limit, doesn't just retreat into mere survival. It seeks meaning, beauty, and connection, laying the foundational stones for all of human culture that was to follow. But the thrill of these discoveries comes with a profound and complex responsibility, forcing us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question: who truly owns the past? The unearthing of a frozen artifact or an entire city isn't just a scientific event. It's a cultural and political act that ripples through the present, especially for the indigenous communities on whose ancestral lands these finds are often made. For centuries, the field of archaeology was dominated by a colonial mindset, where treasures were extracted by foreign expeditions and displayed in distant museums, severed from the living cultures that created them. The people whose history was being uncovered were rarely consulted, often exploited, and almost never saw the benefits of the discoveries made on their own doorsteps. Today, we are grappling with the legacy of that approach and striving for a new model, one built on respect, collaboration, and shared stewardship. This begins with the critical principle of free, prior, and informed consent. Before a single core sample is drilled or a trowel touches the earth, archaeologists have an ethical obligation to engage with indigenous communities who have a cultural connection to the land. This isn't a mere formality, it's a meaningful, often lengthy process of dialogue. It means explaining the goals of the research in accessible terms, listening to community concerns, and genuinely incorporating their perspectives into the project's design. For these communities, these sites are not abandoned ruins. They are sacred landscapes, the resting places of ancestors, and living chapters of their ongoing story. A burial site is a cemetery, not a data set. A ritual object is a sacred vessel, not merely an artifact. Failing to recognize this distinction repeats the sins of the past and causes real harm. Collaborative research flips the old script. It involves training and employing community members as full partners in the excavation, not just as laborers. It means incorporating traditional knowledge, oral histories that have been passed down for generations, which can provide invaluable context that pure science might miss. And most importantly, it ensures that the discoveries benefit the community itself, whether through educational programs, cultural revitalization projects, or a central role in deciding how and where the findings are displayed. The question of ownership then naturally leads to the contentious issue of repatriation. When human remains or culturally significant objects are found, who has the right to hold them? Many institutions around the world are now engaged in the difficult but necessary process of returning sacred objects and ancestral bones to their descendant communities. This isn't about losing history, it's about returning it to its rightful custodians. It's an acknowledgement that some knowledge is not meant for the public domain or a glass display case, but is meant to be cared for within the community according to its own traditions and laws. This process can be incredibly healing, mending historical wounds and affirming the sovereignty of indigenous peoples over their own heritage. Alongside these cultural concerns lies the ever-present threat of commercialization. The moment a site's location becomes public, it can become a target for looters seeking to sell priceless artifacts on the black market, and for tourists who, even with good intentions, can cause irreparable damage through uncontrolled foot traffic and souveniring. Every artifact ripped from its context for a private collection isn't just a lost object, it's a lost sentence in the story of a civilization. Its value isn't in its material, but in its placement. What was it found next to? What layer of soil was it in? That context is the key to understanding its purpose and age, and once destroyed, it can never be recovered. Ethical stewardship means implementing strict protections, controlling access, and sometimes making the difficult choice to keep a site's exact location a closely guarded secret to ensure its survival. This brings us to the final, agonizing dilemma for modern archaeologists: to dig or not to dig. With the ice melting now, the urge is to rescue everything we can. But what if our current technology is still too crude? Every excavation, no matter how careful, is inherently destructive. We destroy the very context we seek to study as we peel back the layers. By excavating now, are we solving a mystery, or are we denying future generations with technologies we can't even conceive of yet the chance to study these sites in a non-invasive way? Perhaps they will have tools that can analyze the chemical composition of the air in a sealed chamber without opening it, or read the genetic material in the soil to reconstruct an entire ecosystem without moving a single stone. Leaving a site purposefully preserved in its icy tomb is not an act of neglect. It can be an act of profound humility and hope, a bet on the future of science and the wisdom of our descendants. It is an acknowledgement that we are not the final chapter in this story, but merely one link in a long chain of curiosity, and that the greatest act of preservation might sometimes be to simply walk away. The sheer ingenuity of Ice Age engineering becomes truly staggering when we move beyond the monuments and examine the subtle, almost invisible details woven into their everyday structures. Consider the seemingly simple problem of keeping warm in a stone building during a glacial winter. At a place like Karahan Tepe in Turkey, archaeologists have found evidence of what can only be described as prehistoric climate control. Builders didn't just stack rocks, they constructed double walls, leaving a cavity between them that they packed with a sophisticated mixture of straw, clay, and even animal hair. This combination created a primitive yet highly effective form of insulation, trapping air and maintaining a stable, comfortable temperature inside that defied the freezing conditions outside. This wasn't just a hut, it was a carefully engineered environment for year-round living, a concept we often arrogantly assume is a modern innovation. Ventilation presented another critical challenge, especially in large, enclosed communal spaces where smoke from hearths and stale air could quickly become a health hazard. The solutions they devised are breathtakingly clever. Some structures feature strategically placed air vents at floor level, designed to draw in fresh, cool air from outside. Meanwhile, a separate opening at the very peak of the roof, often artfully disguised within the building's overall design, would allow hot smoke and stagnant air to escape. This creation of a natural convection current, a completely passive airflow system, required a sophisticated, intuitive grasp of physics and thermodynamics. They were managing indoor air quality and temperature without any mechanical assistance, using nothing but stone geometry and a profound observation of how heat rises and air moves. Perhaps the most humbling engineering feat lies in their mastery of structural integrity, particularly in regions prone to earthquakes. In the Andes, long before the Inca, cultures like the Çatalhöyük faced this constant threat and developed a construction method that still leaves modern engineers in awe. Their most impressive structures often lack mortar entirely. Instead, they used a technique known as ashlar masonry, where immense, irregularly shaped stones are cut with such impossible precision that they fit together like a complex three-dimensional puzzle. The blocks are slightly convex on their outer faces and concave on the inner sides, allowing them to interlock perfectly with their neighbors. During a seismic event, these walls don't crack and crumble, they dance. The stones shift and settle against each other, absorbing and dissipating the tremendous energy of the tremor, and then, when the shaking stops, they simply settle back into place. This is a level of seismic engineering that many contemporary buildings, with all our advanced materials and computer models, still struggle to achieve reliably, and it was perfected over 1,000 years ago through observation and experience. We cannot overlook their hydrological genius, which points to a deep understanding of public health and civil engineering. At many of these ancient sites, from the hills of Turkey to the mountains of Peru, we find extensive and complex water management systems seamlessly integrated into the architecture. At Nevali Sori and other sites, archaeologists have uncovered networks of meticulously carved stone channels and drainage ducts built directly into the bedrock and foundation stones. These weren't merely simple gutters to handle rainwater. They were a carefully planned utility system designed to efficiently channel fresh water for collection and storage, while also managing waste and preventing erosion and flooding around the foundations of the buildings. This shows a profound foresight and a community-wide approach to health and sanitation that we would only see again millennia later. This leads to the most provocative question: did these societies possess knowledge that was later lost? Some researchers point to more enigmatic findings that hint at technologies beyond simple survival. The astounding acoustics in certain underground chambers and passage graves, where a simple whisper can be heard clearly across a large room, suggest a deliberate manipulation of sound, perhaps for ritual or oracular purposes. There are even more speculative theories about the use of naturally occurring piezoelectric materials in certain stones, or the strategic placement of structures to harness telluric currents or geothermal energy. While these ideas remain firmly in the realm of speculation without harder evidence, they challenge us to keep an open mind about the full scope of ancient innovation. The ultimate testament to their brilliance, however, is that modern scientists and engineers are now actively reverse engineering these ancient blueprints. The passive solar design principles evident in the orientation of their buildings are being studied for application in modern sustainable architecture, reducing our reliance on artificial heating and cooling. The seismic resilience of their mortar-less masonry is inspiring new research into flexible, disaster-resistant building techniques. Even their simple, effective methods of food storage in naturally cooled pits or permafrost are being re-examined as low-energy solutions for food security. These frozen blueprints are not relics of a primitive past. They are a library of sustainable, resilient technology that we are only now, in our era of climate crisis and resource scarcity, beginning to fully appreciate and relearn. The past isn't just a story to be studied, It is a masterclass in adaptation, holding elegant, time-tested solutions to many of the very challenges we face today. Buried deep within the frozen soil of Siberia, archaeologists made a discovery that would quietly upend a century of assumptions. It was the grave of a young woman, dating back over 2,500 years, a time when the Scythians roamed the Eurasian steppe. But she wasn't surrounded by the jewelry and domestic implements typically associated with female burials. Lying beside her was a complete arsenal, a battle axe, a quiver full of arrows, and a bow. For a long time, such finds were dismissed as anomalies, perhaps symbolic items placed by grieving men. But then, scientific analysis entered the picture. When researchers examined the skeleton, they found something even more revealing than the weapons themselves. The bone structure showed clear, pronounced muscle attachments consistent with a lifetime of drawing heavy bows and riding horses. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. This was a warrior, and she was a woman. This single grave, and others like it emerging from the permafrost, forces us to scrap the simplistic image of Ice Age and early nomadic life where men hunted and fought while women gathered and raised children. The frozen evidence is painting a far more complex, collaborative, and frankly, more interesting picture of our ancestors. This revision of history is written in the objects placed carefully with the dead. Across Europe and Asia, from the Upper Paleolithic through to the Metal Ages, we find women buried with the full toolkit of a big game hunter, projectile points, blades for butchering, and even the sharpened rods used to pressure flake-fine edges onto stone tools. These weren't just any tools, they were often items of the highest quality, masterfully crafted and well used, indicating they were personal possessions, not just symbolic offerings. In other graves, women are interred with items that speak of spiritual authority: carved wands, ornate headdresses made of animal teeth and shells, and stones etched with intricate patterns that likely held ritual significance. The message from these frozen tombs is unambiguous. Women were not confined to the periphery of survival or leadership. They were integral to the hunt, central to spiritual life, and likely held positions of respect and authority that we are only beginning to recognize. This active participation is vividly brought to life in the art they left behind. We're all familiar with the famous Venus figurines, which have often been interpreted solely through a lens of fertility. But if we look beyond that one narrow interpretation, the artistic record reveals so much more. Cave paintings and carved plaques show women running alongside men in hunting scenes, not as passive observers but as active participants. They are depicted manufacturing the very technologies that made survival possible, scraping hides to make weather-proof clothing, weaving baskets and nets, and expertly crafting the complex, multi-part weapons that brought down mammoths and bison. In one fascinating example from a site in France, a carving shows a woman standing near a large animal, holding what appears to be a throwing stick, her posture one of focus and readiness. This art wasn't fantasy, it was a reflection of their world, and it shows us that the division of labor was likely based on skill and circumstance, not on rigid, biologically determined gender roles. Perhaps the most revolutionary insights come not from artifacts or art, but from the realm of genetics. Advanced DNA analysis is now allowing us to read the personal stories of individuals who died thousands of years ago, and the results are shattering our ideas about mobility and kinship. For a long time, the prevailing theory was that in hunter-gatherer societies, women were the ones who moved. The idea was that they would leave their family group to join a partner's group, preventing inbreeding. But the genetic evidence is revealing a far more dynamic picture. While this pattern sometimes held true, we also find overwhelming evidence of men moving just as frequently. The isotopes in their teeth, which record the geological signature of the water they drank as children, show that many men buried in a community were born far away. This suggests a fluidity of movement for everyone. Women were not passive tokens exchanged between groups, they were active agents of cultural connection. A woman moving from one band to another would have brought with her a wealth of knowledge, new tool-making techniques, different stories and rituals, innovative ways to prepare food or medicine. They were the original networkers, weaving a web of shared ideas and technologies across vast distances, helping to create the resilient, interconnected cultural world that allowed humanity to thrive during the harsh climatic swings of the Ice Age. All of this evidence points toward a society that was, in many ways, more flexible and potentially more egalitarian than the civilizations that followed. The intense, cooperative pressure of survival in a Pleistocene world likely meant that every able-body's contribution was valued. Your value to the group was determined by your skill, your strength, your intelligence, and your knowledge, not by your gender. This stands in stark contrast to the more rigid social hierarchies that often emerged with the advent of agriculture and the accumulation of wealth and property. When societies became more settled and focused on land ownership and passing inheritance to heirs, paternity, and the control of women's roles became more emphasized, leading to the patriarchal structures that came to dominate much of the world's later history. The Ice Age, in a cruel twist of irony, may have been a time of greater relative equality, where the shared, immediate struggle for survival against the elements created a social structure that judged people not by preconceived notions, but by their tangible ability to help the community endure. Recognizing the multifaceted role of women in these ancient societies does more than just correct the historical record. It fundamentally enriches our understanding of human innovation and resilience. It forces us to ask new questions. Were the first tailors who engineered form-fitting thermal clothing women? Did the first person to observe that a certain plant could ease a fever or that a specific clay could bind a wound hold that knowledge in a woman's mind? The story of human survival is not a single-threaded narrative of male invention. It is a tapestry woven from the distinct and complementary strengths, insights, and experiences of all members of the group. By finally seeing the women in the ice, we don't just add a few new characters to the story. We rewrite the plot entirely, understanding that our species' greatest evolutionary advantage was always our ability to collaborate, to share knowledge, and to value the contribution of every individual in the face of a frozen, unforgiving world. And yet, for all the breathtaking finds we've already made, the truly staggering realization is this: we have only just begun to look. The vast, frozen frontiers of our planet remain overwhelmingly unexplored, a blank canvas on which we have sketched only the faintest outlines. The potential for future discovery isn't just promising, it is absolutely immense, limited only by our technology and our imagination. Think of the world's glaciers and permafrost regions as a global archive containing billions of yet-to-be-read volumes, with each summer's melt revealing a few more pages. The next few decades promise an archaeological revolution, not from shovels and trowels, but from a new generation of robotic explorers and sensing technologies that will allow us to see through ice and water as if they were glass. The true game changers will be the autonomous explorers, robotic submarines, and underwater drones capable of navigating the pitch-black, crushing depths of the submerged continental shelves. These aren't the clunky, tethered machines of the past. They are sleek, intelligent vehicles that can map vast swaths of the seafloor with sonar and laser scanners, identifying unnatural shapes and geometric patterns hidden under centuries of silt. They will be our eyes in the eternal darkness of places like Doggerland, systematically scanning the drowned plains of the North Sea to find the hunting camps, burial mounds, and even sunken forests that have been lost for millennia. Above them, airborne LIDAR will continue to peel back the layers of dense jungle and thick ice, revealing the ghostly footprints of ancient causeways, foundations, and earthworks that are completely invisible from the ground. This marriage of marine and aerial robotics will effectively allow us to strip away the water and the vegetation, finally viewing these lost landscapes in their entirety for the first time since the ice receded. The most tantalizing targets for these technologies are the last great unknowns on Earth, the interiors of Greenland and Antarctica. We often think of Antarctica as a pristine, lifeless desert of ice, but it wasn't always so. Satellite surveys and radar scans have already revealed a shocking secret hidden beneath 2 miles of solid ice. A vast, dramatic landscape of deep fjords, towering mountains, and liquid lakes, a continent-sized world that has been completely sealed off for millions of years. This isn't just barren rock, this is a preserved ecosystem, a snapshot of a world before the ice took hold. The mind-bending question is, could there be evidence of human activity there? While conventional history says it's impossible, the continent's northern fringes were ice-free much more recently than we once believed. Could a seafaring, cold-adapted people have explored its shores, leaving behind temporary camps or sacred sites that were subsequently engulfed by the advancing glaciers? It's the most speculative of ideas, but the sheer scale of the unknown means we cannot rule it out. The possibility alone is enough to ignite the imagination. Beyond grand structures and lost landscapes, the holy grail of Ice Age archaeology lies in the preservation of the most fragile and intimate materials, the organics. The permafrost has already given us leather, wood, and even human flesh. The next frontier is finding objects that could reveal the inner world of thought and belief. Imagine uncovering a piece of woven textile with a complex symbolic pattern, a visual language that could be decoded, or consider the almost unimaginable discovery of a written record. We assume writing began with the Sumerians 5,000 years ago, but what if a system of notation, a precursor to writing, was developed much earlier and lost? A carved bone or piece of ivory with a series of consistent, purposeful marks could completely rewrite the history of human communication. Even more profound would be the discovery of a true time capsule, a sealed container, perhaps made of leather or clay, holding a collection of objects deliberately left behind, a message from the deep past intended for the future. Every one of these potential discoveries carries the power to shatter our established narratives and force a fundamental rethinking of who we are and where we come from. A single site, perfectly preserved under the Antarctic ice, could prove that human exploration and adaptability are far older and more incredible than we ever dreamed. A piece of cloth with a woven story or a tablet with an unknown script could give a voice to people we have only ever known through their stone tools and animal bones. This is not just about filling in gaps in a timeline. It is about the very real possibility of entire lost chapters of the human story, cultures and civilizations that rose, thrived, and vanished without a trace, their entire existence wiped clean by the ice and the rising seas, waiting silently for us to develop the tools to find them. The quest to uncover these hidden blueprints is more than an academic pursuit. It is one of the last great adventures on Earth, a grand, global detective story where the clues are melting out of the ice at this very moment, offering us a fleeting chance to recover our species' long-lost memory. To truly grasp the full picture of these frozen worlds, we must move beyond the traditional image of an archaeologist working alone in a trench. The most profound breakthroughs are now happening at the intersections between fields, where a geologist's data sharpens an anthropologist's theory and a geneticist's discovery sends everyone back to the drawing board. This is no longer a solitary pursuit. It's a grand, collaborative symphony of science, with each discipline contributing a vital part of the score. Imagine trying to understand the story of a book by only looking at a single, torn-out page. For decades, that's what archaeology was often forced to do, relying on stone tools and bone fragments. But today, we can read the entire library, the climate records, the genetic legacies, the botanical evidence, all at once, allowing us to reconstruct ancient lives with a richness that was once pure fantasy. Consider the humble grain of pollen, a particle so tiny it's nearly invisible. To a palynologist, a scientist who studies these microscopic time capsules, a core sample of mud from an ancient lakebed near a site like Çatalhöyük is a detailed historical record. By identifying the types and quantities of fossilized pollen trapped in each layer, they can paint a vivid picture of the changing environment. They can tell us precisely when the wild grasses around the settlement began to disappear, replaced by the distinct pollen signature of domesticated wheat and barley. This isn't just evidence of agriculture, it's a timeline of its adoption, showing how quickly these early farmers transformed their landscape. Combined with the analysis of phytoliths, microscopic silica structures left by plants, researchers can even determine what people were eating, what they were using for bedding, and what materials they woven into their baskets. This botanical testimony, read from the dirt itself, turns a static archaeological site into a dynamic, living ecosystem. Meanwhile, in a clean room laboratory, another kind of detective is at work. By drilling a tiny sample from a human femur found in a Siberian permafrost grave, a biomolecular archaeologist can perform isotope analysis. This process measures the unique chemical signatures locked within the bone, which act as a lifelong dietary diary. A specific ratio of nitrogen isotopes might reveal that this individual ate a diet very high in animal protein, pointing to a reliance on hunting. Strontium isotopes, absorbed from the local water and geology through food, act like a GPS tracker. If the strontium signature in a person's tooth enamel, which forms in childhood, doesn't match the geology where their adult bones were found, it tells a story of migration. We can now trace the journey of a woman who was born in the foothills of the Altai Mountains, but was buried thousands of years later on the plains of Europe, proving that these ancient people were far more mobile and interconnected than we ever believed. This holistic approach is where the real magic happens, as techniques from one field solve stubborn mysteries in another. A perfect example is the enigma of the Younger Dryas period. For years, archaeologists had found evidence of a sudden, catastrophic abandonment of sites across North America, Clovis points left beside Mammoth kills, hearths gone cold. The what was clear, but the why was a heated debate. The answer didn't come from a new dig site, but from the ice cores of Greenland. Climate scientists studying the layers of ancient ice identified a terrifyingly rapid temperature drop of nearly 10 degrees Celsius happening within a decade. This data was the smoking gun, providing the environmental context for the archaeological panic. Then, geologists entered the fray, discovering a thin, continent-wide layer of sediment containing nanodiamonds and elevated levels of platinum evidence that supported the controversial theory of a cosmic impact, perhaps a comet airburst that triggered this deep freeze. Suddenly, the story was complete. A celestial event caused a climatic catastrophe that forced a human diaspora. No single discipline could have solved that puzzle alone. This interdisciplinary synergy is pushing the boundaries of what we can know, turning speculation into evidence-based science. Geneticists sequencing DNA from the soil itself, a technique called environmental DNA or eDNA, can now identify every plant and animal that once lived in an area without ever finding a single bone or seed. This allows us to reconstruct the entire food web an ancient community depended upon. Physicists using muon radiography, a technique that uses cosmic rays, are essentially creating X-rays of large structures like pyramids and hillsides to find hidden chambers without any digging at all. Each technological borrowed from another field acts as a new key, unlocking doors we didn't even know were closed. This collaborative spirit is our greatest tool for piecing together the complex puzzle of our frozen past, ensuring that the lessons etched in ice are not lost to time but are instead recovered, understood, and used to navigate the challenges of our own rapidly changing world. These ancient blueprints, preserved for millennia in nature's deepest freezer, are far more than just artifacts or curiosities. They are profound testaments to the unyielding spirit of human ingenuity, resilience, and adaptability. They show us that even when confronted with overwhelming, planet-altering challenges, our ancestors did not simply give up. They innovated, they collaborated. They packed up what they could carry and embarked on perilous journeys into the unknown. They buried their most sacred temples with the hope of one day returning, and in doing so, they left a message for us across the ages. From the awe-inspiring stone circles of Göbekli Tepe to the vanished hunting grounds of Doggerland, now lying silent beneath the North Sea, these frozen time capsules offer us a priceless glimpse into a world that was both remarkably advanced and heartbreakingly vulnerable. They achieved so much, and yet their entire way of life hung in a delicate balance, susceptible to forces far beyond their control. This history holds up a mirror to our own moment in time, delivering a powerful and urgent lesson. Climate change is not a new phenomenon. It has been a potent and recurring force in shaping the entire course of human history, capable of birthing new ways of life just as quickly as it can erase them. The stories of adaptation, of migration, of societal collapse and rebirth are etched into the very ice that is now melting away. Our ancestors' responses to environmental catastrophe, their development of new technologies, their cooperative social structures, their difficult decisions to abandon cherished homelands provide us with a deep well of wisdom to draw from as we face our own global climatic shifts. They teach us about fragility, but also about our incredible capacity for endurance and creative problem-solving. Now, as the planet warms and these icy vaults relinquish their secrets at an unprecedented rate, we are handed both an incredible opportunity and a solemn responsibility. Each summer's melt reveals new wonders, but it also accelerates the decay of these organic treasures the moment they are exposed to the modern air. We are in a race against time to locate, document, and preserve these sites, to learn everything we can from them before they are lost forever. This isn't just a task for archaeologists. It is a calling for all of us to support these efforts, to advocate for the protection of our shared human heritage, and to listen to the stories these ancient blueprints have to tell. They are a library of survival, a catalogue of innovation, and a chronicle of resilience that is directly relevant to the challenges of our own century. We are so grateful you joined us on this incredible journey into the depths of history, unraveling the mysteries of humanity's first cities frozen in time. This is a conversation that is just beginning, and your perspective is a vital part of it. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Which discovery fascinated you the most? What lessons from the past do you think are most crucial for our future? If you want to keep exploring these lost worlds with us, please subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next adventure into the unknown. Together, let's continue to uncover the frozen past, not just to understand where we came from, but to help illuminate the path